So, morning, Peter. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another one of our podcasts. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm working from home and inside the house for once, rather than outside in my quotes shed, unquote. So yeah, very comfortable. How are things with you?
Good. I must tell you a thing that happened to me, Peter, that I'm absolutely mortified about, but it's caused me to really laugh. So I'm very famous for killing green things. I just don't seem to be able to keep plants alive in my house. And my neighbour is very green-fingered. I mean, she helps me in my garden. Well, I say helps me. She basically does the garden because she's so brilliant. She bought me a plant for Christmas, and when she smiled, she said, "I don't, you can kill this." And I thought she's bought me a super sturdy plant, and it's one of those that you hang, so it's hanging in my bathroom from the ceiling. Anyway, I was absolutely determined to prove her wrong, that I could keep a plant alive. So I've been looking after this plant. I've been watering it assiduously. I've been like really carefully nurturing it, breathing on it because I heard oxygen's good for it and things like that. And it was only at the weekend I said to my partner, "Oh, do we need to order that plant again?" And I thought, well, I'll just feel the soil to feel if the soil is dry or damp. So I reached up precariously, I have to say, because I'm from the ceiling, I'm not very tall, to feel in it for the soil, and couldn't feel any soil. So I was like rooting about thinking, and then suddenly realized that it was a plastic plant. That I spent all these weeks watering a plastic plant. I mean, we were crying with laughter, the pair of us. And my partner was particularly annoyed because I'd made him water it last week and he hadn't spotted it either. What was particularly funny, though, Peter, was just before I did the whole, I wonder if the earth is feeling, the soil is feeling damp or dry, I said to Andy, I think it's grown. So I might have even managed to make a pass. Insult to injury. I was so determined to be successful. Oh, it's so incredibly funny. It's had me weeping with laughter the entire time. But actually, what's interesting about it is about how we see what we want to see. And we believe what we want. I wanted to believe it was a real plant that I was being successful with. And so I therefore wasn't checking the evidence of my own eyes. I wasn't, I didn't touch it or feel it, and if I did touch it when I was watering it, I wasn't paying attention because I was so determined in my belief that this was a real plant and I was keeping it alive. So very funny. Wow. But, it made me think about how sometimes seeing only what we want to see results in us electing people who, otherwise might be causing huge damage to the world, but we don't see that. So, of course, Peter, I'm segueing into Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk.
Well, fake plants, fake news. What do you want? What is the outcome you seek from your plant? If it is something that looks good in the short to medium and longer term, and it has given you pleasure, without the anxiety of having to keep it alive, what's not to like? Is it fake or is it real?
Yeah, well, I'd rather it was real.
Would you?
I could keep it alive.
Oh well, maybe, but why? Why does it need to be real? It's a bit like the AI poem that I wrote you before Christmas. That was packed full of emotion and heartfelt feelings, but it wasn't real, was it? It was delivered by a machine, and so you didn't appreciate it. And I did declare honestly that it was a plastic poem rather than a real poem. But if I hadn't done so, it would have delivered what you maybe needed in the short term, and that might have been all right. So maybe
until you then find out that the thing that you believed in, the thing I thought, I mean, I know it was AI because you told me it was, but if I'd have genuinely believed you wrote those words and they were about me, and then I found out you hadn't, you just told AI to, I would have been distraught. The damage would have been worse than if you'd
commissioned them
in the first place.
I'd commissioned them. I had said what it was that I wanted to be delivered. Do I have to personally be the author? And I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. It's increasingly hard to spot the difference between what we would traditionally regard as real and what we would traditionally regard as fake, and that is especially challenging when it comes to the news and what politicians are saying and doing and all the rest of it, isn't it? So so to be provocative, what a really exciting and inspiring moment we have had with a new president of the United States coming in and cheerleading in a remarkably visionary way with an awful lot of energy, a sense that America is going to be on the move, and these really fortunate, lucky people over the next 4 years, because that's all he's got, are going to be whipped up into a whole load of positive developments, in contrast to what they have allegedly been suffering over the previous 4 years. And I think back to a podcast of ours which we did last year, Deborah, when you were bemoaning how the rhetoric of the Labour government was really downbeat and depressing, and we need hope, we need belief, and where is that? Because we're all in this rather kind of doom loop over here of negativity. So there we are. Some people are in receipt of this energy from their new president and feeling rather good about it, I guess, which is slightly scary.
Yeah, I would say, and I know you're being deliberately provocative, so listeners, by the way, before you start, sending us hate mail, Peter is stirring the pot. He has much more nuanced views than that. But I would say all that you said about this positive energy, the blah, blah, the Americans, all the rest of it, I'd say it's basically bullshit. It's fake plants. It's utter nonsense. It's not going to be better for America. It's not going to be better for the world. It's not going to be better for human beings. There are a whole raft of human beings, not just in America, but in the UK, who are now genuinely frightened for their lives, actually, in many cases, frightened for their rights, frightened for their ability to live in their life. And, it's that sort of, that bombastic, we had the same with Boris Johnson. People said Boris Johnson, but he brings this energy, he's got this charisma, okay, he's a bit of a clown, but we rather like that. We don't like boring politicians. And I'm like, well, and I get it, Peter, you're absolutely right that, positive messaging can overcome all sorts of things for people, because people do want simple messages, but perception is not reality. And we have to keep saying to people, all that look at the state of our country based on the bonhomie that was introduced by, Boris Johnson, for example. All the corruption that crept in, all the poor behaviour, the downplaying of standards in public life, the, ministers getting away with absolutely all sorts of bullshitty stuff. You can tell I'm quite angry about the whole thing. And I think, why people fall for it. I fall for stuff myself, of course I do. And I do think that, that the Labour government does send out such negative messages all the time that it's hard to find the hope. But at least they're not bullshitting. At least they're not lying. At least they're not promising stuff. I would rather have a boring, sensible person who knew what the hell they were doing than somebody like Donald Musk. Well, there you go. Total Freudian slip there, Donald Trump, what have you. So I personally am deeply frightened by what's happened. And because, for example, I have a number of transgender friends, and one of them is due to travel to the States in a few weeks' time. And my transgender friend is largely now living as a woman. But when she goes to the States, she's going to go as a man because she's far too frightened to go in any other guise, and what kind of a world is that? And that might seem like distracting stuff. And I've heard all sorts of comments saying like he does the chaos, but it's like underneath it. And it's like, it's just bullshit. It's dangerous rhetoric. And when people show you, who was it who said, is it Maya Angelou or somebody like that? When people show you who they are, believe them. And I have to say, all that, releasing those 1,600 people who broke the law, who stormed the Capitol and just with an executive order, just basically said, well, I'm just going to override the law and the rights. And all that's going to do, Peter, as you can tell, I'm quite impassioned about it, it's going to empower people. But actually, the thing is, we're blaming Trump, because I've been thinking about this, and I was thinking, actually, Donald Trump is not really the problem here. The Republican Party is the problem here. Do any of this if he wasn't a member of that party, and if they didn't facilitate that, if they didn't allow it to happen. So you can talk about Trump, we can say it's all his fault, he's a dreadful person, etc. But actually it's about the Republicans in the Republican Party wanting power at any cost, regardless of what it means for other people. So there you go. So I would say I absolutely get your point about, rhetoric matters and people do pay attention, and it does feel like a positive. Well, it feels positive story if you don't give a shit about human rights. It feels like a positive story if you couldn't give a stuff about the climate. It feels like a positive story if you don't care about people who are disenfranchised. If all you care about is your own personal wealth and your own situation, then of course it's a positive story. And yes, there are people who are like that, clearly, otherwise they wouldn't have voted for him.
Yeah. I mean, you can't, again, just to be a bit provocative, and then come round to where I am and all of this. You often hear as a leader, you can't please all the people all the time. You've got to set realistic objectives. You've got to set realistic timeframes. You've got to achieve what you can with a clear sense of purpose, and then bring people behind that clarity. And so for someone who's got 4 years to deliver some particular things which he really cares about, if the rhetoric is strong enough to whip enough people up behind it, that is quite a dangerous situation to be in. And now, what do I not like about this? Leading by fear. We've all probably worked in organizations or seen leaders who have been extremely determined to deliver something, and they create a culture in which you can't speak up or say what you think for fear of the consequences. And it feels like we've got that in spades, to the point where Joe Biden's last act is to issue pardons to his family for crimes which he says they have never committed. But for the other side, well, that's an absolute gift, isn't it? Because he's now playing exactly this kind of responding to that kind of culture of fear, and playing right into that. Oh, these politicians are all the same. They've got no principles. They're just looking after their own. That is that's a problem, isn't it?
Oh, that Donald Trump would come out. He hates the Democrats. He hates Joe Biden. He's been after Joe Biden and his family. Absolutely know that that's what he would do. He would prosecute or find a way to jail the members of Joe Biden's family. So I think he's doing that. I think the man's right to protect his family and his close associates who've done nothing but support him. It's like sometimes you're faced with that dilemma. What the hell do you do? And I would have done exactly the same thing. And the other things about it is just that. So what does Donald Trump actually want? Does he want greater good for people? He wants his wealth and power. That's what he wants. He couldn't shit about. About the disenfranchised or the poor. He doesn't really care about people who are in situations through no fault of their own, And I think that you're right, leadership led by fear, that's a bad thing. But actually, what's scarier is a lack of a moral compass, a lack of a sense of humanity. That is the problem. And I was talking to a member of my team recently about this, and we were talking about negative emotions. And I was saying, because this individual was talking about, shame and guilt and embarrassment and stuff like that. And I was saying, but they're brilliant emotions. They're the right, we must have them. And you must celebrate it when you feel shame and when you feel guilt and when you feel embarrassment, because they're the things that keep you on the straight and narrow. Those are, when you feel guilty about something, you feel guilty because you know you did something wrong. And that guilt powers you to not do that thing again. Same with shame, same with fear. All those things are very powerful, positive human emotions, because they're what help us to keep society together and families together and relationships together. And when you have leaders like Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, you have absolutely no sense of shame or guilt, what you get is people you can't deal with. What do you say? Like you saw, but in the church service that they have, there was the minister, and I'm ashamed, I'm going to commit her name to memory because I was so impressed. And she basically told him off in her sermon. She said, you must not discriminate against these people. There's a load of people now in fear because of you, and you need to, sort of twisting around the God thing on her. That takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. And his response to it, it wasn't a very good sermon, it was a bit boring. Elon Musk's response to his Nazi salute, which was absolutely a Nazi salute, and all those people saying like, oh, it's because he's autistic. Shit. Autistic doesn't make you a Nazi. It doesn't immediately mean you can have, and you know this better than anybody else. It's like they might do inappropriate behavior, but autistic people then don't say, well, okay, I'm going to do it again. The whole thing is just It just makes me feel utterly, utterly sick. And here's the thing about, oh, we'll get over it, or whatever it was he said. He never admitted it at all. That it's so dangerous, Peter. That's why I'm so passionate about it, because I'm terrified.
Yeah, I think my introductory remarks lead you to a position where the ends justify the means. So you pick the things that you want to achieve, and at any price, you then go ahead and achieve them, to the benefit of the people who are, for assuming you've got the skill and ability actually to execute on the things you're saying, which is a whole other argument. But I agree with you absolutely. What is missing is that moral compass, values, something which I have really enjoyed about being a leader in civil society, as opposed to government, is to be able to shape an organization's values and to lead with regard to the values. So it's not just what you do, it's how you do it, and to measure people's performance, not just on what they do, but the way in which they go about doing it. So you build inclusive leadership, inclusive cultures. And I find that really fascinating. Now, it's not that in government you couldn't lead and behave with values, but you were always transacting in a context that was set by ministers in various different ways. So when I used to have conversations with people about, are you going to come back to government and all this, I say, well, the intellectual content of government policy jobs is amazing, and the ability to sort of set context and all the rest of it. You do have an interesting, albeit rather distant, kind of ability to influence what's happening in real life. But what you don't have as a senior civil servant, but you do have as a leader of a charity, is that opportunity with the trustees really to shape the values. And we don't, the politicians haven't been elected on a kind of manifesto of values in the States, have they? Now, Keir Starmer did come in saying that the values were going to be different, and I do think back now to the kind of height of Boris Johnson and Partygate and Owen Paterson and all that sort of stuff, and it was depressing, that kind of inconsistent behavior and sense that the ends were justifying the means, as opposed to working consistently in a particular way with good values.
And it's not necessarily the party political thing, is it? Because I think about the Conservative Party in particular, and I think about the difference between Boris Johnson, for example, and Theresa May. Now, there are lots of things that Theresa May stood for that I don't agree with, but I would never have described her as a person without values. I would never have I wouldn't have, with Theresa May, I might not have liked what she did and how she did it, but I would never have questioned her integrity or her commitment to good government and things like that. You know what I mean? So it's not, people often say it's because you hate a particular political party, like you're anti-Republican.
Oh, not at all.
And I don't think that's what it's about at all. I think it's about, as you say, the moral centre, the moral compass, the values that people bring. And you can be of any political persuasion. There are some, I'm sure there are Republicans, not enough of them, who have very strong moral compass and a really deep compassion for fellow humans. Ditto Conservatives. I've met loads of Conservative MP who are really good, decent people. It's not the party that's necessarily the problem. Although in the case of the States, and actually in our case with the UK, it was often the party's desire for power that facilitates these kind of leaders being put in place, really. And then you look at what happened. So people say that the Constitution, the laws, it could never become. But look what happened in Russia. Russia had quite a strong democratic process. It had rules about how long a prime minister could serve, a president could serve, and all that. And all Putin did was rewrite all the rules and got away with it. You know, so there's nothing actually to stop anybody doing that.
So what would you do if you were the Prime Minister of the UK now to establish and reinforce the importance of values? Because Keir Starmer did say that was what he was going to do, but again, if you just sort of dip in and out of politics, you can't help feeling, oh, it's same old, same old. The anti-corruption minister has just resigned because they've been accused of being corrupt, and there's all this noise going on. And what's a plastic plant, and what's a real plant? What's a real piece of news? And how does one demonstrate energy through values without sounding boring?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, honestly, Peter. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm awfully grateful for not being a politician, because, you know, it's hard enough. You and I have had to sit next to people at dinners who we really couldn't bear and we thought were awful, but we had to be nice to them because one way or another, they were going to help us to achieve our cause. You know, either they had a shed load of money that they were going to donate to our charity, or they had influence or the ear of somebody who might like introduce a piece of legislation. We've all had to do that. And I kind of get that. You know, there are all sorts of regimes across the world. It's not just the new American regime, but all sorts of regimes that are really unpleasant. And for ministers, of course, you're stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, because you can stand on principle and say, we will not negotiate with people, we will not deal with them, we won't trade with them. But what you end up then doing is impoverishing your own nation because you need the resources from the other one. So I think these are impossible situations in which to be. The only thing if I was Keir Starmer, what I'd probably be doing is making that point, is saying, this is not going to happen here under my leadership. As far as I'm concerned, you know, nobody is going to be discriminated against. People like, you know, I'd be making that clear for here. And unfortunately, we have to build a relationship with people whose values we don't support and we don't agree with. And sometimes we're going to have to do that. And that's just how difficult the world is. And I think what I've said to you before, I think Labour's really shit at comms. And I think they don't do enough of the relating it to your situation, because people always think about their own situations in whatever they're hearing, you know, that we're relating it to our own situation. If you can segue a big, like, kind of, I can't think about this, it's too scary thought. So just like I've said to you, we've all had to be nice to people we don't like. We've had in-laws we haven't liked and haven't got on with, but we couldn't be horrible about, you know, we've all of us got, you know, the weird racist uncle in our family. Do you know what I mean? It's like everybody's got a thing. And we navigate through life with those complications. And if you were to, and so everybody can recognize that, you know, we all know there are people still spend time with who actually we don't really like and we don't like their values, but for whatever reason we're going to. And I think if they can start relating things we can recognize to, and we just now have to, that same thing is happening, but it's happening at a global. I think a lot more people would understand. And I just think, I've said this before, but I think the media didn't just keep chasing the clickbait, you know, just like they want the negative story all the time. They want to fight. I mean, half the time the stuff they're writing about Labour is just nonsense, irrelevance. You know, it's not core to what's running the country, but it's this, they just want this constant negative messaging out there, and it influences people, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I said earlier, when it comes to leadership, you can't please all the people all the time, but that's not the same as having really strong, consistent values and principles that you apply as an individual and as an organization to everything you do. So I mean, you have this thing, you know, don't be a dickhead, don't you? And there's a kind of be kind or be more kind. There are ways in which we can conduct ourselves which are respectful of others, and it just becomes harder and harder to do that when other people with a lot of money and a lot of influence aren't playing by the same rules. And I guess that's the situation that Joe Biden found himself in when he decided to pardon his family.
Yeah, absolutely.
I still find that really difficult.
I would have protected my family 100% if I was leaving and he was coming in, and I knew that there was a real danger of them being punished. I would absolutely have done the same thing. You know, I would have done. Of course, I would. You know, many would. So I think that's the trouble. This is why it's about, you know, it's like life isn't straightforward. You know, it's not black and white. So when people talk about victims' voices, for example, in sentencing, and I was having a discussion with my police officer brother-in-law about this, you know, many years ago now. And I was saying, the thing is, if somebody hurt my mum, if somebody murdered my mother or damaged her in any way, shape or form, and you asked me what I wanted, I would want that person to be eviscerated, to be dragged through the streets on the back of a horse, to be publicly humiliated, to be castrated. I would want the worst possible. So please don't ask me, because I want revenge, not justice. So yes, of course you must assist victims. You absolutely must. But you also need to recognise is that justice isn't about making the victims feel better. That's not what justice is. Justice is about, for me anyway, it's about looking at the whole picture about what's gone on here and applying the justice that feels appropriate. And victims are never, ever going to be happy, ever. I wouldn't be. If whoever attacked my mum, they better not bloody dare. If they attacked my mum and got sentenced to a life sentence for the rest of life in solitary confinement, I still wouldn't be happy. That wouldn't be enough for me. Do you see what I'm getting at? So I think we've got to recognise that, there isn't black and there isn't white. There's not simple, there's not straightforward. And we've just got to keep, yes, of course, it's easy, especially in this modern age, for people to be attracted by sound bites and by positive energy and all the rest of it and ignore the rest of it. But that's not okay. And we've got to keep telling people that is not okay. It's like, yeah, it's not okay. And also for people to see the consequences. I mean, we've got friends who voted for Brexit, and one of their kids, is like going through a little bit of a challenging time. And one of the suggestions has been, one of the suggestions from another friend who is an older person who voted for Brexit said, well, do you remember when our other child went off and worked in Greece for a year? Why don't you get, nameless child to go and do that? And then, the response back was, well, they can't do that anymore. Well, why not? Well, because Brexit. Because you can't now, you can't just wander off as a young person to part of Europe and do like we used to be able to, because the rules changed and you voted for the rules. And then what you get back, of course, is that, well, before Brexit, we weren't able to, just travel about freely. We had to do visas and things like that, and we managed. It was like, but wasn't it better when we didn't have to do all that stuff? Why would just because we coped before? It's like we coped before people had, mobile phones. I don't know. It's just. So much for me, it's about you can't just say, well, that's how people are. I don't want to accept that, Peter. I know you're not saying that, but the kind of things like people respond to that stuff. Well, okay, but then let's those of us, which I think the point you were making earlier, let's those of us who do have a moral compass and a set of values, make sure that we don't fall into that trap of by all means, we should be more positive and more energetic and paint a picture of hope, which this government is definitely not doing. But on the other hand, not lying. Or anyway, this is why I'm not a politician, because I would struggle too much, Peter, with the I can't if there's somebody who I really profoundly dislike and disapprove of in public life who's going to be at an event that I'm supposed to attend, I won't go. That's how shit a politician I would be. I wouldn't be able to be nice to people who I thought were awful.
Yeah, there've been so few people ever in public life I have profoundly disliked and disagreed with. I've always felt there's a kind of common ground somewhere, and to try to find that consistent with the values we were describing earlier, I suppose, is what I've prided myself on being able to do. But we are beyond that with and we talked in the last episode about what Elon Musk was saying about putting Jess Phillips in prison. I mean, that is so back to front and beyond appropriate in the context of the issue that he was talking about, that even I would struggle at finding the common ground there. And then it's rather important that you don't. So one doesn't. So knowing the principles that we are standing for, and then applying them, and applying them in a non-partisan, party political way. Because I do agree with you that this isn't. I don't think this is a left-right thing. But some of the people who pile into it want to make it about that. And clearly, as charity leaders, we're subject. Well, I'm not anymore, but you are subject to the regulations about what is appropriate and inappropriate from a political point of view. And I think there's plenty of space to be able to stand up for people and principles here without fear of being accused of being party political.
Well, and I absolutely agree. But it's also this other, the other thing that's been bugging me is that, they keep saying like Donald Trump knows how to run a business. And Elon Musk knows how to run a successful business. They know how to make money. They know how to do deals. And I'm always thinking to myself, but that's not the same as running a country. Running a business is a relatively straightforward exercise. There's one simple goal, which is to generate profit for shareholders. Nothing wrong with that, provided they're paying taxes and contributing to the economy and employing people. So I'm not knocking it as a principle, but that's not your job as a country. You're not running a country to make a surplus. You're running a country to use the resources that you gather in to spend them appropriately, just the same as we are with charity. It's more similar to running a charity. You're raising revenues in order to spend the money on supporting the citizens of your country, particularly those citizens who need more support than others. That's not the same thing. So bringing that business mindset to running a country seems to me to be absolutely bonkers. It's simply not the same. The economics aren't the same. The drivers aren't the same. The outcomes that you actually really want for the country aren't the same. Anyway, you know what, Peter? We really thought we'd have loads to talk about other subjects than this, and this entire, thing that's gone on in America has taken up the whole of our time. Apparently, our lovely José listeners is waving at us, saying, "Time's up, get off."
It's going to run, isn't it? As a theme, and it's very topical. And let's see where we go. But yeah, challenging times.
But there is hope, because the one thing about these tech giants with all their social media platforms, so the social media definitely facilitates the horribleness, but it also facilitates the awesomeness. It also brings people together. It also encourages people to fight back, and there will be, back in the olden days when we just had newspapers to rely on, you couldn't galvanize human beings or let them know what was going on in quite the same way that we can now. So actually, and I feel that the silent majority will be increasingly less silent. And for me, the silent majority is always generally kind and compassionate. They just don't want to get sucked in, and they're not going to have a huge amount of choice. They'll have to get sucked in. So I think good will prevail, because I think it generally does.
Well, we've done our best to have a conversation today when the easy option is to stick your head in the sand and say this is all too desperately difficult. So something to build on, let's hope. And I hope that was of interest to listeners. Let us know what you think, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks very much.
Bye.